This is Earth Radio. And now here's human music.
Welcome back to Speedy's Garage, everybody. We're going to continue the shop build series this week, but first let's go back and look at some of the questions you guys had from last week's video. Matthew Morelli, he says that he had really good success with the Max Jacks and used it for about 7 years. He says he originally purchased the unit due to having a standard 3-car garage with limited ceiling height. He thinks it was around 10 feet. He says in that situation the unit worked well and he had no component issues over the 7 years and much easier than jack and jack stands. Mobility and space was needed for something else. So that's a good point. I need to look into those Max Jacks. You're the second person I think that recommended I take a look at those as an option. I've got the pads poured, as you'll see in this video, for a 2-post lift. I really like that idea, knowing that I can just walk over, drive the car up, lift it up and work on it, but it would take up some space. What I might do eventually is lay out some boxes in here where the pads are and about the size that I think the posts will be, and then I'll park the car in here and kind of see what everything's going to look like and try to kind of imagine or envision what the structure would look like. Overall, I don't think it would be that big of a deal. When I measured out and laid out the shop floor, I did it with the intent of having a 2-post lift eventually, and so I tried to kind of figure out where everything would be, but there's nothing like a true test with some boxes and stuff to kind of see where we're at. So Matthew, thank you for the comment. Nemo Shop says great video. CFM17 Hellcat says great info, looking forward to the paint, info, and color. Height of the gray, width of the red band. We're definitely going to get to that, so stay tuned. CFM17 Hellcat, we'll get to that. I will measure and show you how I came up with that stripe, and it wasn't just random. I actually did that on a specific measurement to figure out what would look the best, and there's a purpose behind that paint. We'll get to that when we get to the interior after sheetrock is installed. NHRA 7110 says awesome and thanks. And then Road Huggers Trucking actually has a couple of questions. He says, how did you negotiate how much it costs to build the garage with your builder, and how did you decide which builder to go with? Well, it's a long story. When we built the original shop, I think I mentioned that, or the original garage on the house, the attached garage, it ended up being a little bit short for what I needed it to do. So when I called the builder back, we were a partnership in that home build. Obviously, I told him, look, you knew I was going to have shop space out here. I air conditioned the space, and now I can barely work on a car in here because of the space constraints. And they assured me they would take care of me when I decided to do a detached shop. But I picked 4 local builders who had excellent ratings. One of them was obviously the builder of the home, and I took quotes from all 4 of them. And at the end of the day, the builder who built the home, who I trusted already because they actually were pretty good, and who had all the paperwork on the mortar, the brick, the windows, the structure, the shingles, all the things I wanted to match the house, ended up being much more reasonably priced than the other 3. And so my advice there would be, obviously use your negotiating skills, number 1. Number 2, make sure that the price includes everything you want it to include. Some things I did on my own. We'll get to paint. That was one of the things. The lighting, the actual fixtures. What most builders will do is give you a allowance on what you can spend on your lighting, and usually it's not very much. And so I kind of bargain hunted at some of the hardware stores to find their clearance aisles and things of that nature, and was able to pick up the bulbs, and I'll talk about that later when we get to electrical, and negotiate a little bit on the fixtures. But long story short, get 4 quotes, and that way you can kind of tell each builder, hey, I'm getting quotes for this build, and I'm gonna base my decision on who I go with on those quotes, and it usually will come down to a price per square foot. You'll know if they're in line or not. And if they all end up being very, very close, then I would try to base it on someone who had something built by that builder that you could go talk to and say, how did the process go and what was the end result? So keep that in mind. Great info, going to be building a new place. This is from Perry Osbrooks with a detached garage. It was super helpful. When's the next 4Runner project? Also, if you ever change the headlights on the 4Runner, I'll buy them. I don't know when the next 4Runner project will be. It's a pretty well completed project. It will need some maintenance, so we're probably going to be doing a timing belt before long. So Perry, keep an eye out for that. I don't know when I'll get to it, but it's going to need one, so I'll definitely do a video on that when it comes time. Frank Lyle says he's definitely following along. Plans on building a whole shop, including my wood shop and 3 car bays. Once I moved to the mountains in a few years, $55 a square foot wasn't bad. He thinks in Atlanta it would be more like 75 or 80. And he says the variance application and approval process, he says, don't get me started. Anything around Atlanta is brutal. Agrees on the neighbors, and he's in a constant state of discord with the HOA. They like to make everyone's life difficult. Well, I will say that as a result of all the things going on, I'm the president of the HOA now, and I did that specifically to keep things simple, so that, you know, people should own their own homes and neighbors should work together, and I'm a strong believer in that. I was asked to actually take over as the president of the HOA, and I agreed, and that's how I try to kind of run things. Not that I run anything, but that's when people come to me with complaints, I always ask them, did you talk to your neighbor? You know, and unless it's something just really out of whack that doesn't go with the accord of the neighborhood, I'm not inclined to you know, make anybody's life miserable. Let's see. Hot SVP says that he went with T5s. He says he wouldn't go with LED because it can possibly interfere with your garage door clickers. I didn't consider that actually, and so that's something you probably want to check into if you're considering LED lights, is will it cause any radio frequency interference? Stephen Rockwell says great shop and video series. He especially liked the 3 on the Quincy compressor. Thank you, Stephen. Those I'll try to link to so that you can kind of have an idea of when we did the air compressor closet, how we did the air compressor that we used for the shop and the shop air. And he asked, when is Mrs. Speedy's calendar coming out? Man, she left me high and dry in 2019. I actually asked her for a new calendar for Christmas, and for whatever reason, she didn't make me one. However, she did come in and comment behind Steven and say Valentine's Day is right around the corner. So hopefully Miss Speedy will take care of me on that calendar. Okay, Rock Crawler says the one dislike video must be the neighbor lady. That could be. And then Swamy, I think it's how you pronounce his name. He says she then forced her husband to dislike it as well. All right, guys, so that's all the comments and questions that we had from the last video on the shop. So now let's get back to this one. So thanks for all the comments and questions. Each week I will go back and look at questions and comments from the previous week's video in this series, and I'll try to answer some of those questions for you. So be sure to leave questions below or comments, whichever the case may be, and I'll refer back to those next week. So in the first video, we went over the plan, and now that we had the plan laid out, we went and got with a builder, chose the builder that could do the job to match the house, which the HOA requires. We then ran into a little bit of a hiccup where we ran into a city ordinance that dictated where detached structures could be. And last week I went through how we took care of that with a variance, had to go down to the city. Wasn't a huge deal, but it did delay the project about 5 weeks. Be sure to go back. I'll link to those up at the top if you haven't caught up already. Now that we had the plan complete and had that presented to the builder, we got the variance from the city, we were ready to go to start the build. And so we had to start with some destruction, I'll call it. And the builder had to come out and do a little bit of work in the yard to prep for the garage. And one of the things I had to figure out is what to do with the sidewalk. So originally, go out here and I'll show you. Originally this space had a mulch bed with some shrubs and a sidewalk. And because of the space that we had to work with the setbacks and everything before we got to the property line, I started looking at what we would need to do here. And if the garage butted right up to the sidewalk, we had enough room. The challenge or the concern I had was that water runoff. If you got water between these two structures, the house and the garage, where would it go, first of all? I'm sure when they originally put the sidewalk in, they didn't tilt it or anything to let the water run off. It might still have, I don't know. But the second concern I had was in the wintertime when water would get down in there and freeze. So now you've got a big concrete structure on one side, a big concrete structure on the other side. I got worried that the sidewalk would just crumble over time from the ice and everything that would form around it or under it or, you know, whatever. And I also worried again that water would end up coming into the shop somehow. So what we came up with was this pea gravel stepping stone solution. And that is Indiana pea gravel. And it matched the house pretty good. It's the specific color. You could get brown or whatever else, but that color kind of had the gray tones in it to match the mortar on the house. And then these stepping stones I actually got from an overstock place. I think they were like $2 a piece. So I tried to save money wherever I could, and I picked these up, and then the builder just put them in with sand underneath as like a base, I guess. And so that's how we solved that problem. But as you can see, there used to be a sidewalk here, and the builder did come in and chop it up. You can see there's the burned areas of the grass where I guess the blade they were using to cut on the sidewalk generated some heat. And then they had to get in here with some heavy equipment, and they had to figure out what to do there to avoid damaging the yard very much or the driveway. And on the driveway, what they were concerned about is you got this edge right here. And what they did, as you saw, they had to dig out a little bit. And so if you have heavy equipment with tracks on it rolling off the edge of that concrete, they were worried about busting it somewhere back here. And so they had to wait for a very specific type of, I think it's called a backhoe. And it had rubber treads and was kind of lightweight. It was a medium duty. And the challenge was the builder's unit that they actually had was broken. And they had to order a special part to repair it. So again, we had a delay. It took them about 3 weeks to get that part. So they started getting the footers in place. As you can see there, they got the footers going. They did that one day, is probably on a Wednesday, and then 2 or 3 days later on Friday, they came back and poured the concrete. You can see that there. And that allowed them to let the concrete set up over the weekend before they were supposed to come back on that Monday. However, again, we had that problem with the equipment, and so we had about a 3-week delay. And to meet the requirements of the HOA, the builder did have to bring in a dumpster and set it out in front of the property. I'm glad the one they used wasn't massive and looked like an eyesore. This is the one that they chose, and it actually worked out great. They would come by and empty it about once a week, and that was just to meet the requirements of the HOA. And so those delays are something I wanted to touch on. I actually did consider, when I was first starting to plan out the build of the shop, just doing it myself and hiring out the contractors to come and do the work. You'd have your concrete contractor, your excavation contractor, your brick contractor, sheetrock contractor, electrical contractor, plumbing contractor, and just have them come in as needed and take bids on the job. And I asked 3 of my friends who had done some building in the past, and one of them actually did contract work, and all 3 of them said the same thing. They said, man, do not do that. They said, hire a company and let all those contractors be their problem. He said, what you can run into is that one of the contractors will come out and they'll do just a little bit of work to start the job. Well, they're also working for some big builder and doing a neighborhood close by, and they're getting paid to come do 5 or 6 houses or whatever. You're going to get put on the back burner. And so they may come start your shop and then be gone for a month and then finally come back. And now that contractor has held up the next contractor that was in line behind him, and now he's got a conflict. And he said it's best to just hire a builder that will manage all of that for you and avoid the headache. That was the first thing they warned me about. The second thing was the insurance. He said, hopefully they're all, insured and bonded and all that. But he said, heaven forbid a worker come over to your property and fall off a ladder and hurt himself or something, and that not be the case. That worker might not be here legally, might not have insurance, and then you're the one on the hook because it happened on your property. And so those 2 things alone were enough for me to decide I'm just going to let the builder deal with it. And even then, we still had a couple of delays because of various scheduling conflicts and equipment issues. But after the couple of weeks delay, the equipment got repaired, and they started on the foundation, and they started putting in the block. The builder came out and measured out, or the super. I had a really good super on this project. He and I ended up becoming friends by the time it was all said and done. He was a fellow drag racer, which helped. And so he and I would catch up and chat a lot. And I really think he did a little bit extra for me because we built that relationship, and it was super nice. He made things nice and non-stressful. And so he came out, laid the block out, did some measuring, talked with the foundation contractor who was going to come out. They laid out the block. They got the excavating equipment over, leveled out the interior of the shop, got all that graded. They put in some water drains just to make sure we didn't ever have any water issues, and those drain straight out the back of the shop and out into the yard. And you don't even see them. They're kind of cut like bologna cuts or something like that, and they're kind of in the ground. And they're also that corrugated type drain that has holes in it, so it lets the water just kind of gradually drain out. I've never had any issues. It's been several years. We haven't had any water issues at all, but he put those in just as an extra precaution. And then they came in and did the gravel to get the shop ready for concrete. And with the shop being ready for concrete, it meant a little bit of the plumbing had to be done. So I wanted to have hot and cold water out in the shop. Obviously, we're gonna have the restroom, talked about that. We're gonna have the sink. We also did a spigot to allow for garden hose connection up towards the front of the shop so we could wash a car or get water for a mopping bucket or whatever that we might happen to need. And so the plumber had to come in and run some preliminary plumbing before the concrete went in, and also the floor drain. You can see there, they put a floor drain in and they covered it with plastic so that when the concrete went in, it didn't mess up the drain. It's I think a 4-inch by 36-inch drain. And then the drain pipe actually connects back to one of those corrugated pipes that I talked about earlier. They did a test. You can see there's a stack pipe that they used to pressure test the system to make sure there were no leaks. You can see the green inspection sticker there that says that it passed. And then we figured out where the lift posts were gonna be for the 2-post lift, and we dug those out 8 inches so that they would be 8 inches thick, and that's a 3-foot by 3-foot base. And that way, when the lift post goes in, it had plenty of support, and we upgraded to 4,000 PSI concrete, which was only literally, I think $100, maybe $150 for the entire shop. And so that brings us to concrete. Now, a lot of this would happen during the day while I was at work. So as you saw, I had a camera set up. It was looking out a window from the house and doing some time lapse of the work that was happening while I was at work each day. The big milestones, like when they were laying out the Bricko block for the foundation, I wanted to come and just double check the size. I came home for that probably during lunch. The super would text me and tell me when they were getting close to doing something like that. The next thing I did, I came home, I wanted to see the concrete. The biggest thing I was worried about was the ingress, whatever it is, when you pull into the garage. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't real steep, because I knew over time I'm gonna have lower cars. The original Orange Crush car was real low to the ground. The Hellcat's not much better. I have friends that have Corvettes and whatnot, so I wanted us to be able to pull cars in and out of here without any fear of them dragging on the concrete. And so I actually talked to the concrete guy, and we did adjust the angle a little bit. I think it's only like a 14 or 15 degree angle by the time we got everything set up. And I told him, I said, we got low cars, make sure it's a nice gradual angle. That's exactly what they did. They also dug out the spots for the lift posts. I made sure that happened, as you saw. And so that gets us to, I think, a good stopping point for this week. I actually got pretty excited at this point. I did go back and christen the concrete. So over in the corner, I'll show you that. So there it is, christened. That was the day the concrete was poured. And I wanted to make sure to mark it Speedy's Garage and put the date on there. So now that we actually had a foundation and the concrete done, I was getting pretty excited about the project. I was starting to see some real progress. It was getting later in the year. We started this whole process in the summer, and I had hoped it would be complete by fall. Unfortunately, with the delay with the city, we had a couple of equipment delays, and then the builder got busy, and that delayed a week here and a week there. It started pushing into the fall. So now we were getting into late September. Still okay. I was hoping that everything would be finished and up before it got too cold. You'll see how that turns out, but keep that in mind when you're working on a project like this. There's schedules, and if I had to do this again, I probably would have, I don't want to be like a jerk to the builder, but I probably would have put some milestones in the contract. And somehow, I don't know if you can do a financial thing or something, I don't want to call it a penalty, but some kind of way that they have to meet milestones on certain dates. I wish I had done that. I don't know that would have agreed to it anyway, but that's something to consider if you're starting a project like this. So we're going to call it quits there for this week. Be sure to tune in next time. We're going to continue this series with the shop. Leave questions below like I mentioned. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. That helps me get these out into the vapor land of YouTube and get more viewers and more subscribers, and I appreciate you guys that do that. Be sure to check us out on Instagram. It's at Speedy's_garage, as well as our website, www.speedysgarage.net, and I will be seeing you out there.